Roe v. Wade has finally been dismantled. Women throughout this nation are livid due to the Supreme Court's overturning of this legal issue. The divide has begun, but a closer look of this topic will show the connection between black women and ethnic annihilation of ethnic people here and then worldwide. What is Roe v. Wade, Eugenics, and Margaret Sanger? This will be addressed as well as others involved in this diabolical plan. This plan targeted African people who naively claim to be African Americans. Be prepared to hear the unedited narrative of this act of genocide. Greetings, family. Hotel. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum to all the family. And I greet you in all the African dialects. Before I get started today, first I need to tell you who I am and a little brief history about myself. My name is Bobby Beverly. I'm known as Professor Bobby. I have a master's and I have a bachelor's in history. I've been studying history for 45 years. Also have one published book, and my thesis was on Hannibal Hamlet. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up because so far this is the fifth installment of a section of history that I've covered. But this one seems to be drawing some pushback from some that don't look like me and some that don't look like us, and at least one of us, because I'm speaking on a subject that I was told I don't have the right to speak on. As a historian, historians have the right to speak on anything concerning history. And I want everyone that can hear me to understand this. When it comes to the black woman, no one is going to respect the black woman more than a historian. Why? Because we're the mother of civilization. So I want you to understand that. So this is a tribute to you, but I need you to understand that this must be told. And there are those that have a problem with that. And I'm not concerned with them having a problem with that. So with no further ado, I'm going to get right directly into this presentation. That's fine. All right, first let me start with this man right here. This man's name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Now, for those of you that have never heard this name, everyone needs to know this name. And you're probably wondering what this has to do with eugenics. So you'll see the connection with these few men that I'm going to be talking about, because these men have been detrimental to the growth of us as a population and also our psyche. So Johann Friedrich Blumenbach is the man who coined the term race. What do I mean by he termed the term race? He's the one who came up with the 5 groups of people that identified on this planet. Before this planet had any Caucasians, anyone of any other ethnicity, this planet was inhabited by only those of African descent. Let me say that again. Before anyone else was on this planet, all of humanity on this planet was of African descent, or Kibelanian, whatever term you want to use. For those who are studying history, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's get into what Blumenbach's contribution is to this subject. So Blumenbach is considered the main founder of zoology and anthropology. And anthropology is the study of bones. Now, it must be addressed that all the bones that are found to predate Caucasian bones around the planet have been traced to African. Every one. As a matter of fact, they're not telling most people on this planet that most of the bones that they have in the museums in Europe, they are the Grimaldi bones, Grimaldi. The Grimaldian were African people. So the first inhabitants of that land that they call Europe, those were African people. And those that went into those caves, they were an African people that mutated. And we're going to get into that. The race theory. This is something that Blumenbach came up with. So we were categorized based on 5 groups of people. So we're going to get into those 5 groups, and we're going to spend a little bit of time so we can understand the people that are on this planet today, and how they got those terms. And here they are. So we have the Caucasian, the Mongolian, the Melanian, the Ethiopian, and the American. Now, I'm going to get into another slide in a moment that is going to tell you exactly what was going through Blumenbach's head. But you're going to see the racism involved in this identification of the 5 groups of people as he coined them. And he was a member of the Göttingen School of History. Now, Blumenbach was from Germany, so I want you to know that. He was from Germany. So Germany, of course, is one of the European nations, and again, this is where the Grimaldi people were found. And the human crania, intelligence smallest to largest. Now, Blumenbach is the one who came up with this crania thing. Now, that is important, and the reason why, because what he stated in his research is that a man or woman's intelligence was based on the size of their cranium, their head. So they would measure your nose and your mouth and your head, the skull itself. And the larger head was the most intelligent, which was the Caucasian. Of course, this is preposterous, but this is what he said and contributed to this presentation and to the planet itself in history. So Blumenbach, first, let's start with the first one, which is the Caucasian or white. First of all, there is no such thing as white. There's no such thing as black. Everyone is a part of the gene pool that is called humanity. So Blumenbach is the reason why we have this issue with race. And most people are not aware of that until now. So according to Blumenbach, who was a Caucasian, the humanities, intelligence, and everything comes from them. But as you can see, he said the Middle Easterners, North Africans, and South Asians. Well, first of all, if you are very aware of looking at what has been presented here, I have no idea what exactly Blumenbach was arguing, trying to loop or group the North African, which were people definitely that were swarthy, that were melanated, that had hue. I have no idea how he can connect the two, but there's another story behind that, another historic occasion in the Mongolian. And next we have Melania, or the brown race. And this is yet the third. And there were 5 identifiers of people of color: the Ethiopian or black race, including sub-Saharan Africans. And lastly, American or red race, including all Native and indigenous Americans. Now, here's the problem with what Blumenbach has offered and given to the world. Again, all of humanity is humanity. It is what it is. The lowest, or should I say, the latest person who came into the human race, as it is known, is the Caucasian. And there's a story behind that. The first man that has been proven to be on this planet without a shot of a doubt is the African people, period. So, but you notice for the American, it said red race. First of all, we have to understand the racism in what Blumenbach has offered to the planet. There's no people on this planet that looks red. So you know that there's something they were trying to hide, or something he was trying to hide. What he was trying to hide is the fact that this was a person of African descent, because the first inhabitants here were people of African descent. There is no place on this planet, absolutely no place on this planet, where Africans did not go first, because they were the only inhabitants on this planet. So here's a summary right here, and this is a summary of this presentation, and I cannot explain how the summary got to where it is, but it did seem to have itself placed somewhere else. I have no idea. But let me go over this real quick. Since the emergence of the Caucasian from the Caucasus Mountains, the planet has been off balance. The African El-Kibulanian gave Earth's Mother Earth's people a social structure and harmony was established. Once the human family began to interact with the Nubian man's lowest form, this species of man has been on a quest to exterminate their parents. All of humanity had its nascent beginning due to the African black woman. Once the mutation man, this is a term I coined, became aware of this, his plan was formulated. Complete genocide of the African black population must be achieved by any means necessary. And as we continue on, so we just went over Blumenbach, and here's yet another man that was leading toward this eugenics. His name was James Marion Sims. Now, if y'all recall, right after the George Floyd incident, around this country, there were white and black and others that were pulling down Confederate statues and flags. And one of the statues they pulled down is this one, Marion Sims, James Marion Sims. Why is it that black women and women should all know this name? This was a monster in human form. He is called, pause, because you'll see in a moment what he was called. So this is Sims. He was called the father of gynecology. One thing as a historian I've said, and I'm not the only one that have said this, men should not be in women issues. We don't carry any babies. We don't have any breasts to feed a child. Those are topics that women should be addressing. So this man is called the father of gynecology. But I'm going to show you just how much of a monster he was. And this all is leading toward eugenics. So in 1876, he was elected the president of the American Medical Association. In a moment, we're going to get to yet a last man. And you have got to know this man's name as well, because he's not that well known, but he needs to be, and he will be today addressed. And this man Sims was labeled the butcher. So if this was such a humane person, why would he have such a nickname? In a moment, we'll begin to that. And in the 20th century, some scholars have now called him out and condemned him for what he done. And what did he do? We're almost there. Subjects, African girl, women with no anesthesia. What he was doing is he was using subjects that were African girls and women without anesthesia. So what he was actually doing is performing on their private parts for humanity, as he was saying. But he killed many of them in this process. And eventually, he would die by his own hands. That's a strange story. It's a story you need to look into. I could get into that, but sometimes I need to leave just a touch out there so you can look to see how did he die by his own hands. Look into that. Next, and this is the last one of the three. This is Morris Fishburne. Now, I could have chosen a much better picture for him, but I decided to show this because if you notice, he looks like a clown. And actually, he was a clown. And let's get to why was he a clown. But if you look at it, this man died in 1976. So why is he instrumental and what does he have to do in any way with eugenics? Well, let's see. Fishburne, 1937, he was placed on the cover of Time magazine for his outstanding work. 1938, he accused the doctor of quackery and he was sued, but he won his case. Now, notice I have quackery is in a mocks. It's being mocked because if you notice at one time, doctors used to be called quacks. Let's get to why doctors in white coats were called quacks. So in 1961, founding editor of Medical World News, he wrote a book, Fast and Quackery in Healing Debunks Homeopathy. Now, let me pause for a moment. This is a major thing that must be known, especially to African Black women. The first mother on this planet was the African woman. The first queen on this planet was the African woman. The first nurse on this planet and doctor, that was the African woman. And why am I mentioning this right now? Because those of us that came up in the 1960s, you might really remember they used to do some strange stuff we didn't understand, like castor oil, like grass. And there's some other things like sassafras that comes directly from the earth. Why? Why was this known? Why was it that they had a Black woman in all the kitchens of the South? Because the Black woman came over here with all the knowledge of health. So for this man right here, Morris Fishburne, to go out and attack homeopathy, he was attacking also African women, because this is something that she had that she brought to this country. Don't get me wrong, women and men had it as well, but it was the women that they used inside that big house on that hill to make sure that they stayed healthy. And here's the most important thing about Morris Fishburne. This man was the head of the American Medical Association. And this man was studying to be a professional clown. Let me say that once again. This man studied to be a professional clown. He failed in most of what he did as a medical doctor. And they labeled this man a doctor and had him the head of the American Medical Association. I don't trust anyone, and no one should, in a white coat, because they're really a quack. You might find one or two, but in the majority, that's where that term quack comes from. Gloria Steinem. Must put some time and emphasis on Gloria Steinem. I know today there are many black women that say I'm a feminist. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. I like what Shahzad Ali said. Shahzad Ali said this, said, the feminist movement, what are black women talking about the feminist? Now, mind you, Shahzad Ali is a black woman. She's a Muslim. Wisdom. What is it that a black woman is talking about being a feminist? The black man, the African man, has never controlled the black woman. We've never been able to do it. Not a legitimate black woman. And in a moment, I'm going to give you 3 examples of what I'm talking about. There are thousands and thousands of examples of black women that have been strong, and every family have them. So for a black woman to follow the feminist movement is insanity. Really, it's insanity. So Gloria Steinem, 1969, she wrote this article, After Black Power, Women's Liberation. Now, did y'all know this? Don't believe a word I say. Anything I say, please look it up. Do you know the #1 person that had a problem when the black man got the right to vote following the Civil War? And by the way, this is a misogynistic society. So it wasn't like black men said, oh, just give us the right to vote, but not the black woman. This is America. This is what America does. She's always been misogynistic. Still is. So they're the reason why they just gave the black man the right to vote. Women, in the majority in this country, didn't get the right to vote until the 16th Amendment. But white women were very much upset, very upset that the black man got the right to vote. So on October the 28th, 1886, the world saw a statue unveiled. Let me say that date again, October the 28th, 1886. What statue was that? It was the Statue of Liberty. Now, why is that important? What does it have to do with Gloria Steinem? It has everything to do with Gloria Steinem and what we're talking about right now. Because that was supposed to have been an African-faced woman. Originally, that statue, a Statue of Liberty, she had locks. She had a broad nose and thick lips. So because this history was trying to be covered at that particular time, and it was cloudy on that day and raining when it was unveiled, there were 2 groups of people that were not allowed to be present, women and black people. Why? Women because they were pushing for the vote, which they were upset with the black man for having the right to vote, and black people because many of them knew that story about the unveiling of that Statue of Liberty. That Statue of Liberty has nothing to do with what they're telling you. Don't believe a word I say. Please look it up. So she co-founded in 1971 this magazine right here, Women's Action Alliance. Now, what I did is I've taken 3 women out of our history, and you're about to see these 3 women, and I'm going to explain to you each one. The reason I'm doing this is just to show you why black women have no business following behind Gloria Steinem and this feminist movement. The black woman is the most powerful person on this planet. Know your role, please, and accept your role and stop following behind people that are leading us the wrong way. So here's the first one. Her name was Mary Turner. Don't believe a word I say. Look her up. I never heard of her until about 2 or 3 months ago. Dr. John Henry Clark, who is one of the greatest historians we ever had, he was talking about her, and I went to look her up. And he was telling this story, and Dr. Clark had a way with telling stories. So when I looked it up, I was blown away. This woman was in the Danish West Indies, and her lover, her companion, he was a slave owner. And what he did is he treated her as though she was a white woman. He was buying her parasols and the most expensive clothes in Europe. And of course, she had hatred for this man. So some of the slaves decided to rebel, and they went to her because she was in the house, The others, of course, were in the field. And they said, hey, look, we have a plan. We're going to come in here and we're going to kill everyone in this house. And we want to know if you're on board with that. So if not, then we can come in and we can do it ourselves. She became irate and she said, well, why would you want to come in here and kill him when I'm already in here? I'll kill him. I'll cut his throat on the way out. And she did. And she did. That's just one example. Just letting you know. So in other words, there were many black women that was leading the way, strong then and strong now. Next, Queen Anne Nzinga. And in my opinion, as a historian, she's at the top of all the black women ever to live on this planet. Why? Wonder Woman? Wonder Woman? Amazon? This woman right here was real. Wonder Woman is fictitious. She had an all-woman army. All women. Y'all hear me? All women army. She fought the Portuguese for 40 years and whooped them everywhere she met them. And what she said to the men of Angola, if you cannot fight for this worthy cause, you cannot sleep in our beds. That's a second example of how strong the black woman is. And I'm going to give you one more. Fannie Lou Hamer, Southern woman. She was into the politics, but she was a strong woman. Now, what they did is they aborted her and her child. Well, excuse me. What they did is they stripped her of her organs, as you know, so she could not reproduce, which they did that a lot, especially during the 50s and 60s. They never told black women what they were doing. They would go in there and they say, oh, we're running a test. They were not running tests. They were sterilizing black women. So here's three strong black women. I could have gave you 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 strong black women. So the feminist movement, please throw that in the trash can. That has nothing whatsoever to do with the black woman. You are the strongest and most intelligent creation on this planet, period. So here we go. We're starting to get close to this eugenics because all this ties in together. And this right here ties in together too. So we know this case is Roe v. Wade. This has nothing to do with no other woman but the African woman. Once again, it seems as though it was for everyone, all women. No, it wasn't. So no one knew until a few years ago who exactly was Roe. We knew who Wade was. That was Henry Wade, and we're going to get to him in a minute. But this is her name right here, Norma Lee Nelson. And of course, she became Norma McCorvey, and also known as Jane Roe. And here's her picture. Of course, this is her later life. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't 100% sure what exactly Roe v. Wade was about. And I started doing some research because I said it was time to talk about Roe v. Wade and connect it with eugenics. And you'll see why I did what I did. So as you can see, this is her birth and her death. She left her family at the age of 13. She was married at 16 to a 23-year-old man named McCorvey. That's where she got her name from. And she had 3 children. And here's the most important thing about this lady right here. 1969, she got pregnant with another child. Some friends told her, listen to what she did. This is how she became famous. Some friends told her, why don't you say a group of black men raped you? And for that, you should be able to get an abortion with no problem. So she lied. She lied. And what's really strange about this, it's not easy to find this information, but those of us that have been taught correctly, we'll find anything we want. And it wasn't hard. I found it. So don't believe me, go look it up. So she became famous for telling a lie. She was pregnant, no doubt about that. But she wanted to abort the child. So what's the best narrative you can use as a white woman? Well, it always works when you say a black man or a group of black men raped me, so I want to abort the child. That's what became Roe v. Wade. So the state in which this took place was in Texas. So This ties in also with the fact of her being pregnant and in Texas. What better lie to tell than a black man or black men raped me? And Henry Wade, that's where you get Roe v. Wade. He was the one that was pushing back using the laws of Texas. And eventually it led to what we now today know as Roe v. Wade. So when this was dismantled, what, a month ago? And I was looking at black women, young and old, on television, and they were upset. And I'm like, I don't think they quite understand what this is about. This is about eugenics. They want the black woman to commit murder because that's what that is. This is murder, plain and simple. And we're going to get to that momentarily. We're almost at eugenics. And in 1987, she finally confessed she was lying. She was lying. So Roe v. Wade came about because of a lie. Let's continue. The founder of Planned Parenthood. It is now time to get into some of the monsters of this diabolical plan. And there were a lot of monsters. But let's read this right here. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. Letter to Dr. Clarence J. Gamble, December the 10th, 1939. And I have the video where Margaret Sanger herself is speaking on this. So we're going to see it, because that way no one can say, oh, he's making that all up. I'm going to let Margaret Sanger, even though she's dead, she's deceased, speak for herself with this right here that you see on the screen. So some key words that have been used with us as a people: bestiality, bestial. First of all, African people have never been into animals, ever. That's not our thing. Don't have to be. We're the most beautiful people on the planet. That's why everyone wants to marry either a black man or black woman. Tall, dark, and handsome. Who is that talking about? And the most beautiful women on the planet that everyone has been raping from slavery to the very day, it's been an African woman. Bestiality is a European thing. I could get into that, and they know I can get into that, but I'm not. So this is just a word that they use with us, but that word does not apply to us whatsoever. Insane. Yes, this term right here coincided with us. Matter of fact, most of your mental institutions you find in the southern states, from Virginia down to Florida, all the way to Texas, they were built specifically for our ancestors. Why? Because they said we had mental issues. Were they correct? They absolutely were correct and still are. You know why we're mentally damaged? Because they did it. It was called seasoning. Remember, when they captured our ancestors, the herbs were first, then the European. They would season them. What is seasoning? It simply meant they went into our minds and took away everything. Our language. English is not our language. That's a bastard language. Slavic is a bastard language. English is a bastard language. That's not a part of us. Our hair. Why would they cut off our hair? It's an identifying marker. So they cut off our hair. Our diet. They changed our diet. They changed so many things, I don't even have time to go into all of it. But it's easy to find. Nothing's hidden anymore. Feeble-minded. Yet another term. That was for us. Feeble-minded. We're slow. The first black actor is Stephen Fetching. Now, he had a long name. It's like 5 or 6 names he had. And it was a very long name. But most people in Black America did not like this man at all. As a matter of fact, he died penniless because if you look at the videos of Stephen Fetching, he talked slow and he always demeaned us. And it was embarrassing. So he's one of the most detested men or women in our history. You get a chance, just look him up, Stephen Fetching. Go on YouTube and look at some of the videos, and you see why they called us feeble-minded. Imbecile. Yet another word that's disrespectful, but that's another word that they use with us. None of this can be further than the truth. And there are more words, but this is the last one I'm using. Moron. The most intelligent people on the planet. Let's put it this way. 99.9% of everything on this planet that is of importance that's been created is traced back to African people. 99.9%. Ships, that was us. Plane, that was us. Cell phone, that was us. Education, that was us. The hieroglyphics, that was us. The first schools on the planet, that was us. I can keep going. So, how can any of these words apply to us? But because of these things in these words, this is all leading toward this diabolical plan to rid the planet of the Negro problem, is what Lincoln would call it, the Negro problem. But they've always had this plan to get rid of the mother and father of humanity. So, this is a short video. And I found this video very appalling when I first saw it, still is. But I want you to see it and I'm going to explain it.
Cuba. Jesse Owens, the ebony streak of Olympic Games, celebrates turning professional by racing against a horse. Jesse had a start of 40 yards in 100 and he won by inches. So what?
Charles Darwin. This is the man who coined the term evolution. He was also a person that believed in eugenics. So, of course, this is the things that are important that needs to be known about him. As you can see, his birth and his death, his education. He was a naturalist, a geologist, a biologist, as you can see, in the science of evolution. And these are some of his books that were important, more so to Europeans, but he was one of those that believed in eugenics.
Hey, this is Kim from Khan Academy. I am the history fellow here, and I am here with Emily.
Hi, I'm the biology fellow.
So Emily and I are here talking about Darwinism. And I'm interested in Darwinism because in the late 19th century, what we usually call the Gilded Age, there is a very prominent interpretation of Darwinism that is called social Darwinism. And social Darwinism wasn't so much an actual form of biology as it was kind of a misinterpretation of how natural selection and the theory of evolution worked that was used to justify or explain a lot of the social inequalities of this time period. And the way people often thought about it was that white Anglo-Saxon people, so Europeans, Northern Europeans, were kind of the most evolved. And this is our timeline of evolution from least evolved to most evolved. And people like African Americans or Asians or Native Americans or even Eastern Europeans were less evolved, that they were on a scale of evolution where they hadn't come as far as Anglo-Saxons. So, Emily, you're a biologist, and I would love to get your take on how it is that natural selection actually works and how this doesn't quite describe what was really going on.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe I can speak first to that specific graph that you've drawn. And I think that this is actually a common point of confusion when it comes to evolution, that there's not really such a thing as more or less evolved in evolution.
Okay, so this gradient really doesn't exist.
No, I mean, there's sort of I think that people sometimes see the pictures of like the ape standing up and turning into a person, and they think, oh, this is sort of a linear path from one thing to another. But what you really get is different types of organisms evolving from a shared ancestor and branching off. So,
all right, so
nobody who's alive on Earth today has been evolving for more or less time since their last common ancestor than anybody else.
So I'm going to draw what I think is how you're explaining this, and please correct me as I go along, but say this is my common ancestor, and then would there possibly be branches like this?
Yeah, that's a great way to draw it. And I mean, certainly humans are all extremely closely related to each other, but like we could even say this for us versus a dog, a bacterium, like pretty much anything. All life on Earth shares a common ancestor, and so that bacteria is just as evolved as you are, actually, in the sense of absolute time, since those two split apart.
Right, so like from the moment that life first appeared on Earth, there has been so much time, and all of us have been evolving from that point. So even whether you're a piece of bacteria, piece a good word, a bacterium.
There you go. Beautiful.
Excellent. A bacterium. I took biology once. Or you are Albert Einstein. You have been evolving for precisely the same amount of time.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Wow. I'm really relieved to find that I could describe that as well as I could.
You did a great job. Beautiful.
So you've done this distinction between evolving from a common ancestor. So how is it that the actual theory of natural selection works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So natural selection, often people talk about it as sort of having 3 key ingredients. And to see how it works, let's imagine that we're just looking at a population of beetles. So picture your beetles to start with. And what would we need to have in order for these beetles as a group to evolve by natural selection? So one thing that we would need is some variation among the beetles.
Okay.
So if you have identical beetles, you're not going to have any that are better at surviving or reproducing than any others, which is kind of a key ingredient for what we're going to talk about.
Okay. So I've got 2 different beetles here. They're slightly different from each other.
Awesome. And you've made them different colors, which is perfect. So we have variation, and the next ingredient that we're going to need is we're going to need that variation to be heritable. So we're going to say that those beetles, one of them is green and one of them is blue, and that's because of something in their DNA. So they have differences in their DNA that create the variation in colors.
Okay. So when you say heritable, you mean that this is something that their descendants could inherit?
Exactly. That is exactly it. So the final ingredient is that the differences, these heritable differences, need to affect how good the beetles are at leaving offspring in the next generation.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say we would probably have more than 2 beetles in our actual population, but let's say this population has just moved into a new area that is very blue colored.
Okay.
So blue rocks, blue flowers, whatever. And there's also a bunch of birds in that environment that really like to eat beetles. And I'm guessing that if they have blue beetles and green beetles, that one of those is going to show up a lot better against the blue environment than the other. So probably a lot of our green beetles are going to get picked off by birds, and they're not going to be able to leave offspring because, gosh, they kind of got at. So when you look at the next generation of beetles, if we know that the colors get passed on, we're going to probably see a bigger group of that, a bigger proportion of that group being made up of blue beetles and less being made up of green. And that is an example of natural selection in action, where you can see that organisms that survive and specifically reproduce better in a certain environment are going to increase in frequency in a population. So you're going to get more and more of these blue guys, less and less of the green guys.
Is there a word you would use to describe this adaptation? Is that the natural selection part, as from variation and heritable? Like the natural selection is just like a good situation.
Yeah, I mean, natural selection is really the differential survival and reproduction.
Okay.
And as you mentioned a great word there, which is adaptation. So adaptation is the word that biologists often give to the process of a population getting better and better suited to its environment. So you would say that the population was adapting to being in a blue space as it gradually started to have more and more blue beetles across generations.
So What I find really interesting about this is that it's entirely by chance, right? More or less, you've got a genetic mutation, and then that mutation happens to suit the environment that you're in, which allows you to thrive and your genes and your adaptations to be passed on over time.
Yes, and I mean the variation would have occurred randomly to start with. Like you say, it would have been a mutation. It didn't happen because the beetles went to a blue place and said, gosh, I should be blue. That would be awesome. That was not what happened. It was already there, and it just happened to be successful in that environment. And if they'd gone to a green place, well, guess what? You would have gotten exactly the opposite effect. Suddenly the green guys would have been more successful, more able to leave offspring, and you would have seen green be increasing or quote unquote favored by natural selection.
And what I did, I took a lot of time in searching out videos where it was important for you to hear them. If you notice, they're laughing. And the reason why they're laughing, because most of the time when they're laughing, it's because they're laughing because they know they're telling a lie. And they're doing a lot of lying, especially with this particular presentation. So look for this video and look at it in its completion. Thank you very much. So let's continue with this presentation. So this is Francis Galton. Francis Galton is one of the first who actually comes out speaking about eugenics. We must rid the planet of this African people. Why? So we can have it for ourselves. The evidence has been everywhere, everywhere. Now, many people that don't study history are not aware of this event. So I'm going to give you an event. I want you to look this event up. I'm going to tell you about it, but I want you to look it up because, again, don't believe nothing I say. So November 1884 to January 1885, there was a convention took place. It was called the Berlin Conference. It took place in Berlin, Germany. Who was there? Every European on this planet was represented by the country in which they resided, except for two, Switzerland and America. Well, what were they holding the convention for? They were deciding on what they were going to do with that savage continent called Africa. And so in January 1885, finally it's over. And they came up with their plan and they exercised it. And what exactly was that? We're no longer going to fight over Africa. We're just going to go in there, everybody carve it up, take what you want, and you're going to rename it. That's where we get the 53 nations, which is now 54 nations. African people never had a name. We didn't need a name. We were nomadic people. We just moved based on the weather, based on the terrain, based on where the food was found. Europeans came in and messed that all up. Don't believe a word I say. Look it up. It's called the Berlin Conference, November 1884, January 1885. And they've been there ever since. So the next time you're someone, especially Caucasian, or even one of us, say, well, if you don't like America, why don't you go back to Africa? Why? They're over there too. As a matter of fact, they're doing more damage in the motherland than here. But like I said, look that up. And yet another video.
When Lincoln signed that Emancipation Proclamation, there was a lot of debate that happened at that point. Some of the previous slave owners saw that maybe this could still be a labor force. Maybe they'll still work for us. However, there was a grouping of slave owners who said, get rid of them, send them back to Africa. After slavery, there was a real significant shift in terms of building our own families. We saw that we were moving somewhere. We were moving forward. But the largest grouping, I think, was those who said, let's just make it so that they cannot reproduce.
As we talk about the role of some of these historical organizations who were really put together for the purpose of the sterilization and stopping reproduction of African American peoples in this nation, the reality is that we have to put it in historical context.
They set out to sterilize us. There's something that's called eugenics, and it involved people determining that we were feeble-minded people And so they need to sterilize us so that we won't carry on these bad genes and infect the gene pool.
And these people who were supporters of the eugenics movement were also the same ones who, in that day and age, were opposed to public education and were opposed to the creation of public hospitals.
And that was a hard period in our lives because many of the women didn't know why they couldn't have children. And they couldn't have them because the state deemed them a risk because they put mental health tags on them, a risk because they wanted to control the birth rate in our community. And people think this is far-fetched.
The discrimination grew with the eugenics. So, blacks were not deemed desirable.
The reality is, without having that knowledge, some of our young people and some of our not so young people feel that those organizations are friends to our communities, and will fight you if you raise issues about the ways in which they operate, the ways in which they are strategically located in or near the African American community.
Back in the day, teenage pregnancy was not celebrated. It was something that was shrouded in shame, and the family did whatever they could do to make sure that the person who was pregnant was taken out of the public eye.
When a teen daughter got pregnant in the 1950s or so, oftentimes, all of a sudden, they would disappear from school. They would no longer be around. And we would come to find out later that they had gone to visit a family back east or somewhere out of the state, and that they had been gone for about 9 months and they came back. And because we were friends, they would say something like, "They sent me away because I was pregnant and I couldn't have it, and they made me give up this baby." That was in the 1950s.
If the family decided to keep the child once it was born, the child was often brought home and the mother raised the child as their own, and the child grew up with the mother as though they were siblings. This is some of the things that happened, and it happened over and over and over.
What you just saw was an excerpt from Marfa 21. Marfa 21 is one of the best presentations I've seen on eugenics. And when I say it covers everything, it covers everything. Now, I'm going to tell you something a little bit ahead of where I'm supposed to be telling you this because it's very important. If you notice right now what I have on the screen, I'm going to read this and explain it because we need to explain this. Marfa 21, Hitler. The following video will show you the connection between the systematic genocide of Black people within America with the intention of global genocide. Upon perfecting their diabolical plan, how they would invent the eugenics monsters to his country. He would invite them to his country to explain their findings. The Jews, the second tragic event of earthly's mass murder, the African Holocaust being the worst, would be killed based on this plan for Black eradication. Let me explain this. One of the biggest fallacies in history worldwide is this Jewish story and the word Holocaust. First of all, when we look into the etymology of the word Holocaust, originally it's stated in the dictionary the Holocaust took place with the Hebrews or African people. But strangely, after 1948, that definition changed. Well, what happened in 1948? May the 14th, 1948, there was a country that was created. It's called Israel. So for those who have any common sense, you need to wonder if Israel wasn't created till May the 14th, 1948, where were these Jews and Jesus at that y'all talk about in the Bible? Because Israel wasn't created till May the 14th, 1948. So that's a little homework assignment I want everybody to look into, because I know how smart everyone is that's viewing this. So let's get into this Jew thing. First of all, the historians, Black and white alike, the historians, I didn't say religious figures, the historians have been doing all the research. Religious figures do not. How do I know that for a fact? Historians have to use everything. When it comes to historical texts or books that are considered nonfiction, I was taught this by my mentor and teacher, Dr. Arthur Abraham. There's no book we can turn away from. We have to read it. If we find it and it's stamped nonfiction, we have to read it. Preachers don't. So I'm saying that to say this. The historians have said what it is. What we know today as religion comes from African allegories. No doubt about it whatsoever. There's no argument about it. There are some that have tried to debate about it, religious figures, but that didn't go well. What does that have to do with eugenics? So the Jews, upon proselyting in, which means they came in because some people that call themselves Hebrews or Hebrew Israelites taught them the ways. They took it among themselves, they did some editing and came back with a new version. And then they told the world they were the original people of Northern Africa. The reason why I'm saying Northern Africa, because what you today call the Middle East, that doesn't exist either. There's no Middle East, there's no Europe. That's Northern Africa. Better yet, Northern Al-Kibalan. Why do I say Al-Kibalan? Because Dr. Yusuf bin Yakanin in his research found that the oldest name of the land that we call Africa is Al-Kibalan, A-L-K-E-B-U-L-A-N. That's the oldest name. So when these Europeans got together, it's called the Zionist movement. Moses Hess and Theodore Herzl, they came along with this plan to create a land for them. And so these Europeans today occupy a small strip of land called Israel that was created May the 14th, 1948. And it's been a mess ever since. So once they created that, and Adolf Hitler found about the eugenics movement, he invited some of them over to Germany, had a meeting with them, and decided to run an experiment using the Jews as guinea pigs, but that experiment was destined to be used on us. How many people know that? So with this Jews movement that they're still perpetuating in the history classes about what happened to the poor Jews, I'm going to give them their argument. 6 million of them was killed. I'll take that. It's not true, but I'll take that. But let's go to the African Holocaust. At the low end, historians, black and white alike, black and white historians alike. Phillips Curtin, who's Caucasian, C-U-R-T-I-N. He said around 10 million Africans were extracted and possibly killed. Then the high end is possibly 600 million. Oh, is that impossible? There's no way in the world they could have extracted that many people. I'm going to say this and we're going to continue on with this presentation. If any of you know of a place called Liverpool, England, Liverpool, England was created for one thing and one thing only: slave trafficking, African slave trafficking. Every single day, 365 days a year, ships were leaving out of just Liverpool, England. Don't believe me? Look it up. So we're going to our next video. Now, some of this has some content and language that might be disturbing, but we'll see.
Given the admiration that Adolf Hitler expressed for the American eugenics movement, it is not unlikely that he modeled the eugenics courts in Nazi Germany after the state eugenics boards in the U.S. In both countries, feeble-mindedness was routinely used as a catch-all justification for sterilization, and the diagnosis of feeble-mindedness was almost always left up to the judgment of the person advocating the sterilization.
During the 4 months that American Birth Control League director Lothrop Stoddard was in Nazi Germany, he not only met with Hitler and SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, he also attended one of the Nazi eugenics courts.
The first case I saw looked like an excellent candidate for sterilization. A man in his mid-30s, he was rather ape-like in appearance. Receding forehead, flat nose with flaring nostrils, thick lips, and heavy prognathous jaw. Not vicious looking, but gross and rather dull. Lothrop Stoddard, Director, American Birth Control League, later known as Planned Parenthood.
From its beginning, Planned Parenthood always had powerful ties to the American eugenics community. In fact, in many places they were often one and the same. For example, when the first birth control clinic was opened in Arkansas, it was operated by the Arkansas Eugenics Association and overseen by a woman named Hilda Cornish. Later, the Arkansas Eugenics Association would become the Arkansas state affiliate of Planned Parenthood, and Cornish would be named its executive director.
So this is yet another excerpt that was taken from Marfa 21. And like I said, again, that is one of the best pieces of information concerning this eugenics movement. But again, this is Margaret Sanger, and Margaret Sanger is very instrumental in this plan, this plot to eradicate African people worldwide. And again, as I said at the beginning, I have a video where you're going to hear her in her own words say such things as we need to rid this planet of them. So this is Margaret Sanger. This is a picture of her right here. So the Comstock Act, as you can see, this is yet something else they continued on with. And as you notice for bullet number 3, birth control information was obscene. So they wanted to have children, but they want to have children that were of European descent and European descent only. And they're still trying to do that, but they cannot. And here's Margaret Sanger.
Thanks to all of you at Planned Parenthood for all the work that you are doing. I was proud to get Planned Parenthood's endorsement yesterday.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision.
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That to me is the greatest sin.
Parenthood received over $363 million in taxpayer dollars. I believe the time has come for that to end. And in 2008 alone, they performed 324,008 abortions.
What he's got against the Planned Parenthood people have yet to discover. They've done, I thought, a pretty good job.
You're going to see us fight to end taxpayer funding of abortion once and for all.
What they want to do is essentially make abortion unavailable.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. I am really in awe of her.
Birth control is amazing, but only if it's what you want. Low-income women of color are more likely to be pressured by doctors to use contraception than white women, even if it's not their preference. But this is nothing new. In the early 20th century, birth control gave women a newfound freedom over their bodies. But the reproductive rights movement was quickly co-opted by eugenicists, who believed they could improve the country by lowering the birth rate of the so-called unfit. In other words, sterilizing poor women, women of color, and those with disabilities. Even Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, used eugenics to justify birth control. She thought society would be better if so-called unfit people had less babies, even if her intentions were good. Eventually, 32 states adopted mandatory sterilization laws. In the 1930s and 40s, North Carolina sterilized about 8,000 developmentally disabled people without their consent. Roughly 5,000 of them were Black. By the 1970s, 70,000 people had been forcibly sterilized across the U.S., including 1/3 of women of childbearing age in Puerto Rico and nearly 1/4 of Native American women, which caused some smaller tribes to face near extinction. In 1978, the government moved to limit the use of federal funds for sterilization, but coercive practices have continued. In the early 1990s, judges in several states gave women convicted of child abuse or drug use during pregnancy a choice: use Norplant, a contraceptive inserted in the arm, or go to jail. And from 2006 to 2010, nearly 150 women were sterilized in 2 California state prisons, 1/4 of them against their will. Even today.
All right. So you've seen several videos. And the reason why I wanted to make sure that you saw these videos, these are women telling you about what they already know. So there are a few that's in the know, and it must be told, and it's being told today. And I know that there are many that are not going to like this, but I'm not concerned about that because the target is an African people. As you can see, the evidence is there. The evidence has always been there. So this right here is a newspaper that they created. Margaret Sanger did, as you can see. So they were putting this out in newspaper forms as well to make sure that everyone that looks like them across this country found out what the plan was all about. And as you can see, Birth Control Review, as you can see, 1917, last issue, 1940. What's on the front cover? Eugenic number. They weren't hiding anything. So Margaret Sanger, birth control, the term came about by this man that was associated with Margaret Sanger. This is his name, Robert Parker. He's the one that termed birth control. But the birth control, again, was specific. It wasn't for Jews. It wasn't for white women. It was just for African women, period. That was it. Evidence just been shown. And there you can see in print, this is when the term came out in print, birth control, that is. And $150,000 was raised to produce this narrative that we now know as birth control. And the FDA, as you can see, they came up with this right here to make sure that this plan was going to be enacted. And in 2014, as you can see, these are the numbers of those that were affected. Numbers look higher for whites than it is Black. But again, as time went on, those numbers would be reversed because that was the plan. So here's yet another video.
Hey y'all, it's Lexual, aka Lexus Joan Day of Intellectual Media, and this is 2-Minute History. To understand the widespread sterilization of Black women, we must first understand the eugenics movement and scientific racism. Scientific racists use erroneous, biased, and misconstrued evidence to claim that white people were superior to everybody else. From this, eugenics, or the concept of improving humanity's genetics, was born. Using these twisted ideologies, social reformers, doctors, scientists, and legislators across the country pushed for forced sterilization laws that would keep undesirables at bay. Undesirables included the disabled, mentally ill, promiscuous white women, Native Americans, Mexicans, Asians, and disproportionately black women. Long stereotyped as unintelligent, lascivious Jezebels, black women, especially poor ones, were prime targets for eugenicists. By 1935, 41 states had laws or pending laws allowing compulsory sterilization. Some women underwent the horrifying procedure in asylums or prison, while others were swindled into signing the right papers at their local doctor's office. In Alabama, 2 poor black sisters, aged 12 and 14, were sterilized when their illiterate mother signed an X on a piece of paper she thought would give them birth control. In Sunflower County, Mississippi, the area's black women were routinely sterilized without their consent. One such woman was Fannie Lou Hamer, who went on to be a civil rights activist. But let's talk about my dear home state of North Carolina. A third of the forced sterilizations there took place on girls under the age of 18. To make matters worse, while most states abandoned their forced sterilization programs after World War II because they didn't like being compared to Nazis, North Carolina increased funding for its program and didn't stop until 1974.
And another video. And I had to make sure that women were speaking about this issue. So I found these videos.
Keep abortion safe and legal! My body, my choice! And what is wrong with Margaret Sanger?
She said that the most merciful thing that a family could do to one of its young is to kill it.
Well, I'm sure that was taken out of context.
In this video, I'm going to show you who Margaret Sanger really was and why she founded Planned Parenthood. These 21 quotes by Margaret Sanger reveal the wicked roots of the abortion movement and expose the twisted mindset behind the present-day culture of death. In her own words, Sanger peddles racism, eugenics, contraception, and abortion, while demonstrating a visceral hatred for children, parenthood, marriage, and the Catholic Church. Every quote I'm about to give you has been verified and is well documented. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies. The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. I accepted an invitation to talk to the women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan. I was escorted to the platform, was introduced, and began to speak. In the end, through simple illustrations, I believed I had accomplished my purpose. A dozen invitations to speak to similar groups were proffered.
Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
The most serious evil of our times is that of encouraging the bringing into the world of large families. The most immoral practice of the day is breeding too many children. Eugenics without birth control seems to us a house builded upon the sands. It is at the mercy of the rising stream of the unfit. As an advocate of birth control, I wish to take advantage of the present opportunity to point out that the unbalance between the birth rate of the unfit and the fit, admittedly the greatest present menace to civilization, can never be rectified by the inauguration of a cradle competition between these two classes. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the overfertility of the mentally and physically defective. No more children should be born when the parents, though healthy themselves, find that their children are physically or mentally defective. A marriage license shall in itself give husband and wife only the right to a common household and not the right to parenthood. No woman shall have the legal right to bear a child, and no man shall have the right to become a father without a permit for parenthood. Permits for parenthood shall be issued upon application by city, county, or state authorities to married couples, providing they are financially able to support the expected child, have the qualifications needed for proper rearing of the child, have no transmissible diseases, and, on the woman's part, no medical indication that the maternity is likely to result in death or permanent injury to health. No permit for parenthood shall be valid for more than one birth. Apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is tainted, or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring. These two words, birth control, sum up our whole philosophy. It means the release and cultivation of the better elements in our society, and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. Organized charity itself is the symptom of a malignant social disease. My own position is that the Catholic doctrine is illogical, not in accord with science, and definitely against social welfare and race improvement. All of our problems are the result of overbreeding among the working class. Knowledge of birth control is essentially moral. Its general, though prudent practice must lead to a higher individuality and ultimately to a cleaner race. Feeble-mindedness perpetuates itself from the ranks of those who are blandly indifferent to their racial responsibilities, and it is largely this type of humanity we are now drawing upon to populate our world for the generations to come. In this orgy of multiplying and replenishing the earth, this type is pari passu multiplying and perpetuating those direst evils in which we must, if civilization is to survive, extirpate by the very roots. Birth control itself, often denounced as a violation of natural law, is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defectives. If we are to make racial progress, this development of womanhood must precede motherhood in every individual woman.
It's so irritating. You people are so irritating. I can't stand it.
Please help us open more eyes to the truth by sharing these quotes. America will only turn back to God when the abortion agenda is fully rejected in our culture. Thanks for watching, and God bless.
So, we've seen and heard from women who are talking about Margaret Sanger, Frances Galton, and all the others, and there have been many, but these are some of the main ones, and Margaret Sanger is definitely on the top. That is the cherry on top of the ice cream, if you want to put it that way. So Planned Parenthood, this is a brand new building. I'm not sure if they ever finished building it or not, and with their plan to go around the world and, of course, eradicate people of color, African descent. And this is Dr. Lena Wynn. Now, I'm at the pause here for a moment. Right now in America, America is talking about Asian hate, along with some other issues. And of course, they're pushing it as a hate crime now because of what has happened to Asians. So this is an Asian woman that was in the head of a medical department in Baltimore, Maryland. And if y'all remember, you probably best remember her because at the beginning of COVID, she was one of the main spokesmen. But for a brief moment, she was a part of Planned Parenthood. So let's see if I get this right. So what blacks are supposedly doing by attacking Asians is wrong. Okay, I can agree with that. But here's a doctor who's pushing eugenics. That's not killing one or two people. You're talking about exterminating the entire planet. And she's standing here smiling. She didn't stay there long because there were some issues that she had. But the point is she accepted it. And she was over this diabolical plan for a short period of time. Dr. Wynn. And this is what she said upon her leaving. I believe that the dispute with Planned Parenthood has been resolved, and I would not comment any further on this private employment matter. As a former patient, I will always be thankful for the exceptional care that Planned Parenthood provides to millions of people every year. I look forward to supporting their critical mission as I continue my life's work of caring for and fighting for women, children, and family. This was well documented, as you can see, and well written. But again, this was Planned Parenthood, whose objective is easily to be proven to be factual. So we need to be very much aware of who's behind the scenes and who's in the forefront in front of the cameras. And she was one of them. So here's a list of those presidents of Planned Parenthood. This is them. And of them, Alexis McGill Johnson, she was African. Most of us would say the term African American, but that geopolitical term of being African American doesn't exist. That we're just African people, period. But many of us want to accept that. That's fine. But she was an African woman, and then of course you have Miss Wynn, as you can see. And this is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, because we're near the end of this presentation. Dr. Welsing was one of the most brilliant minds of African people ever. And in a moment, you're going to see why I have her in this presentation. This is her book. It is a Black classic. It's called The ISIS Papers. And within this book, she put an illustration of something that was so powerful. When I first read it and saw what she put in it, I was blown away. And so I'm going to show it to you today and explain it. So here is the gun. That's the gun. Everyone knows the purpose of the gun. Well, let me explain the gun and the phallus, because we're at the end. So the Black man's phallus, or the African man's phallus, is where all of humanity came from. All of humanity. So if you notice where you see the trigger on the gun is where you found the Black man's testicles. That's what life was, and life still is. So when you pull the trigger, a bullet comes out. The bullet's intent is to take life. So the Asians and Caucasians have come up with this weapon to take out life, primarily who? African people. So Dr. Welsing was explaining the correlation between the Black man's phallus, which is life, and the Asian/Europeans version of life or taking life, which is called the gun. The conclusion: there's life, there's womb, there's the ankh. From the ankh comes the cross. The cross comes from the ankh. This ankh is symbolic of the African woman and life. That's who I am. This is who I am, which is a historian, Virginia State University alum. So at this time, if there are any questions, there's no questions in the chat. Okay, if there's no questions, then I guess we can say thank you to everyone, and I will see everyone in 2 weeks. And that presentation will be on Obama, and it will have 95% of videos that we've seen on Obama, but we really didn't understand what we were looking at. And there is one obvious lie that he told that will be addressed, and I'm gonna let him put the lie out, and then I'm gonna show you why it was a lie. Definitely it was a lie. So I'd like to thank everyone that was in attendance today. Please share this with everyone. Please let everyone know about me. And also you can see my email is right there. Webpage, please, and Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. And there will be more coming. And I'd like to say to everyone, thank you very much. I'll see you in 2 weeks.